Okay, so you're thinking about going to grad school to get a PhD in the biomedical sciences. And everyone you talk to is giving you the same piece of advice. Choose the PI, not the program. So here's a smoking hot take. There are very good reasons to choose the apparent prestige of a program over a PI. And I'm here to tell you why. Quick disclaimer first, I'm going to be a little bit vague when I'm talking about some of this stuff. I don't want to openly trash any of my colleagues, and I don't want to expose any of my friends. I know I'm just some dude on the internet, but trust me, everything I'm going to tell you is based on true experiences. Just a little bit about myself and why I'm actually qualified to speak about this topic. I got my PhD in neurobiology from a top 10 university, and it was totally a reach program when I applied. I applied to graduate programs during the gap year I took after graduating college. During this year, I worked as a lab tech or a research assistant, and my experiences working as a lab tech helped me strengthen my application. Let me just give you a brief overview of some of the programs I applied to and why actually picking a program was right for me. So if your interest in the field is very broad and not super specific, you may be very well off choosing a program rather than picking for a PI. For me personally, my main interest in neurobiology is understanding the mechanisms of substance use disorders. And I recognized pretty early on that studying anything in any of these related fields would keep me interested at least long enough to graduate. Now, in this field of research, some of the top institutions had recruited a lot of faculty who were studying this field. So for my number one pick, there were at least 20-some faculty members who were all working on some question related to substance use disorder. On the other hand, some of the smaller programs, some of the safety programs that I applied to, only had a handful, maybe 2 or 3 at most. Now, I specifically remember following the choose the PI advice when I was sending out my applications. There was one school in particular who I applied to just because I really wanted to work with one specific PI. Now, this school had a small graduate program. It was technically considered an R2 university, meaning that it had some research going on, but its main emphasis was for undergraduate education. The PI had some really neat stuff going on with respect to the genetics of substance use disorder and reward. I read their publications, and I felt like I could absolutely do my PhD working on this kind of stuff. I was lucky enough to get an interview there, and I drove 3 hours in a literal blizzard with, cars pulled over on the side and everything. And I managed to get some interview time one-on-one with a PI. Everything was going really well. It seemed like a really good match personality-wise and goals-wise. The techniques were cool, the lab was fascinating, all of their students vouched for them. It seemed like a perfect fit. Now it's the end of the interview, and they dropped this huge bomb on me. They had just gotten an appointment at a top-tier university somewhere else, and they would be moving their lab. Meaning, if I was given a spot at this program, I would have the option to either move with the PI to somewhere else across the country, or I could continue working with someone else. Now, neither of those options were in my plan. The fact is, sometimes PIs have plans beyond your control, and that there's nothing you could do. For them, their time at this R2 was just a stepping stone in their career. And I definitely don't blame them for choosing the next institution which they're now at. And I certainly don't know any of the specifics. There are all kinds of variables that are involved, and it's not an easy choice to pick up a lab and move somewhere else. There are other factors like family and so on, which I know nothing about. Regardless, in this case, the choose the PI advice failed me. Okay, I admit that was a little bit of a dramatic situation, and for most people that won't happen. In fact, what ends up tending to happen more frequently is my lab is full. Labs cannot and do not accommodate everyone who is interested. Sometimes it just comes down to funding. Sometimes it has to do with physical space. And sometimes it just comes down to mental bandwidth. PIs ideally dedicate a tremendous amount of time towards the success of each individual student, and if you have so many students, you run out. So in the end, the program offered me a position, but with my ideal PI out of the picture, I had to decline. Okay, here's how to not make the same mistake I did. What you can do is actually just email the faculty. Ask the PI about their plans. Some of them may know if they're going to be packing up and leaving the institution. Some of them may know that they don't have room to accommodate any more grad students. In which case, this is going to save you some time between your application and the admissions process. But sometimes that's not going to work out. Sometimes the PI doesn't know their plans until interviews. I'm still very grateful that they told me that they were not going to be there. Okay, so I did a few more interviews, blah blah blah, same stuff, rinse and repeat. And now, let's fast forward to grad school. Through some weird miracle, I got my #1 pick, which was a program with a very strong reputation. I'd actually known 2 people in grad school who had followed the pick the PI strategy, and that strategy failed them. Here's how. They chose their PI based on reputation and publishing track record, but they found very quickly that they had personality clashes with their advisors. The PIs didn't put the students' success as a high priority, and as a result, they weren't on track to graduate within the 5 to 7 years that's expected in sort of a national average. At this point, they basically had 2 options. They could just power through with where they're at now, working with a PI who wasn't fully responsive to their needs, or they could abandon ship, pick up their research, and just start over in a new lab. Both of them actually chose the second option. But because they were at a large institution with a good reputation who had attracted a lot of faculty members, they were able to find somebody else who was also working on the stuff they were interested in. And that's definitely tougher to do at a small program, because there's just not as many researchers there. Now let me tell you how closely related their topics were. They were actually able to use the data that they had collected from the previous lab towards building their new thesis. To be honest, I forgot how long their PhD took, but I do know that if they were at a smaller program with fewer faculty to choose from, they would probably just be forced to work with their unsupportive advisor. Okay, like any real scientist, I know the limitations. This is stuff that happened almost 10 years ago. Times have certainly changed, both from the perspective of the applicants as well as the programs. But the general idea, I think, is still the same. There are circumstances where it's better to actually pick a program rather than just the PI. So how could you avoid the fate of these 2 other students? A lot of times you can't. PIs are always on their best behaviors during interviews. The best thing you can do is you can ask other students in the lab how they feel things are going. At least this way you get an idea of what that PI's management style might be like, but you really won't know until you start working there. And this is why I think people sometimes should pick a program rather than a PI. Alright, am I controversial? Maybe. Let's continue the discussion in the comments below. Did you pick a PI over a program and everything worked out really well? Let me know down below. Share your experiences with everyone else. Thanks for your time today. Have a great day.